Welcome to Ask Pastor Mike Live with pastor and Bible teacher Mike Fabarez, the live call-in program answering your questions about the Bible and the Christian life. Call us right now with your questions at 1-877-913-5357. That's 1-877-913-5357. And now here's Pastor Mike.
Well, hello, everybody. It is Mike Fabarez. I'm here answering your questions for the next hour. Pastor of Compass Bible Church in Aliso Viejo, California, but more known for being the voice of Focal Point. Focal Point, our daily radio offering as we work through verse by verse the Bible, trying to understand what it means and then its relevance, exposing its relevance and how it is supposed to change our lives. That's what it's all about. Author of several books that I hope are helpful to you. My latest one on envy, which I know no one wants to buy that book, but maybe someone can give it to you. It is a book that will help you kind of root out some of the sins in your life, and that's one that I think is needed. I think envy is a much more prevalent sin than we give it credit for. Actually, one of the 7 deadly sins the early church liked to identify it as, a motivation for other sins. They called it a capital sin because it was the fountainhead of all kinds of other sins. And I think that's very wise as you look through the Bible. Jesus has a lot to say about envy. The Bible has a lot to say about envy. And maybe that'll be something you want to check out. Envy. A big problem you didn't know you had. That's the title I gave it, and it's out there. Moody Publishing put it out, and maybe that'll be helpful. A book I often talk about that I wrote that we deal with on this program are 10 Mistakes People Make About Heaven, Hell, and the Afterlife. That's a Harvest House publication, but that particular book kind of gets you thinking through things like purgatory. Is it real? Soul sleep. Is it real? Celestial communism, I like to call it. Is that real? We all die. We all get the same sized quarters, the same uniform we're wearing, get the same amount of privilege, the same, do we all get the same stuff? I got a whole chapter on that. Plenty of mistakes I think we often make in thinking about the afterlife. Maybe we're just see-through Casper the Friendly Ghost just floating around on cotton ball clouds. If that's the case, I'm not real excited about that, but I don't know that that's what you think. But if it is, maybe you need to get 10 mistakes people make about heaven, hell, and the afterlife. That may not be your question, may not be about the afterlife, may be about this last weekend. It may be about next week. It may be about what's going on in your life right now, whatever it is related to the Bible, the Christian life. Give me a call, 877-913-5357. That's what makes the program work, 877-913-5357. No questions too small, no question too dumb. We're here to answer whatever you've got about the Bible, about theology, about Christian life. I just would hope it would be an honest question and one that you're wondering about, one that maybe has some bearing on some decisions you make or how you live your life or what associations you have or whatever it might be. If you want to write in a question, just text the word ASK to 90398, ASK to 90398. That'll give you a form. Fill that out. It'll pop up here on my computer screen, and we will answer that on the air. I already see some coming up here for me. But let's go to the phones. That's a lot more fun. Let's go to the phones. Alan, you're on the line with Mike Fabarez. How can I help?
Hi, Pastor Mike. I have a question about the discussion when Herod orders the death of the 2-year-olds and under in the narrative of Matthew of Jesus. Because what I'm interested in is Matthew quotes an Old Testament scripture about Rachel and Ramah, and I think that that's interesting just from the standpoint of when I look on the map, I look on the map, and Bethlehem is a long ways physically away from Ramah, and I know the history of Ramah and Rachel's burial and lots of things, and it just seems odd to me. It seems like it's geographically it doesn't fit cleanly in that sense because, for example, it would be like if I said, somebody ordered the killing of the babies in Sacramento, and I said, Rachel was weeping in Aliso Viejo. In the ancient Near East where they didn't have Twitter and, social media. I guess the question is, geographically, would they have known? And certainly Herod didn't miss the problem and start killing people 30 kilometers away from Bethlehem. So help me out with that.
Yeah, well, one thing they would know, and they wouldn't need Wikipedia for this, is the story of Israel. Now, Matthew, right, Levi, as he was known before he got a new name here, is writing to the Jews. That's the unique characteristic of Matthew, the gospel, the synoptic gospel. And one thing they do know is about the Babylonian distress and what took place. Jeremiah is writing this, the weeping prophet, because he's there at the end in 586 BC writing about the horrible things that are happening, the lamentation, the bitter weeping. And of course, the other thing they'd know is the concept of Rachel and even that figure that is given and stated there in Matthew 2 about all that went on in the patriarchal period in Genesis. We, unfortunately, don't teach our kids the way they taught theirs, and most of the people would be so familiar not only with the patriarch's wife, but also with the Babylonian captivity and the connections that Matthew makes. We wouldn't give him an A for hermeneutics if you say, well, you're quoting Jeremiah 31 there, but, is that really what that's about? He does this throughout his writings in trying to take allusions that match the concepts and say, here is an echo of the same kind of thing, either an emotive echo or a historical echo or something that's related to what's going on. He's already done it earlier in this chapter regarding bringing out Jesus from Egypt, right? And he's talking about a text that has nothing to do with the Messiah. It's not a messianic prophecy. So here's what I would say. We call a lot of things that Matthew quotes, like Jeremiah 31, we call it a messianic prophecy. But as I'm teaching through messianic prophecies, I put them in two categories. I've got the category 1 messianic prophecy. He would not be the Messiah, right, if he did not do these things. And then there's the second tier. And I only call those a second tier because the New Testament writers try to show these echoes throughout their writings. And Matthew is the number one person to add those kinds of things to the narrative of Jesus's life. And in that sense, I'd say, well, I would never do that in the pulpit. I would never make that connection as a hard messianic prophecy, but under the inspiration of the Spirit, God is moving Matthew to try and make all these appeals of not only the precise predictive prophecies regarding the Messiah, whereas if he didn't fulfill those, he wouldn't be the Messiah, but also things that in some way relate to their Jewish heritage, their Jewish background, and he's just showing those things using a word that I think we would have a problem with, pleroo, which is the word fulfill. We would say, well, how's that a fulfillment, right? Was it even a prophecy, right? And in that sense, this is a tier 2 prophecy. There's a book, and I don't like everything in it, but C.S. Lewis, he was not a biblical scholar, he was not a theologian, but a very smart man in new literature, right? He was the English literature don at Oxford. He wrote about this kind of thing in a little book he wrote called Reflections in the Psalms. When he talked about this two-tiered kind of messianic prophecy, he talked about two-tiered prophecy. And I do think this is something as Western readers of literature we struggle with. But if even someone like Lewis, with his newfound faith now looking at everything in the Bible, can say, okay, this Eastern language has a different way to approach the kinds of things it sees as connections, literary connections. And I think he does that well in that little book. I don't know if you've read that, but it is helpful. It's helpful to me. I read it my first year I became a Christian, and it helped me think about Eastern kinds of literature, particularly as it would appeal to all those people in the first century, and frankly, a lot of people today that aren't in Western culture reading the text and saying, okay, here's another point of contact, here's another point of contact, here's another point of contact. And this touches on two of them. It touches on the Babylonian captivity, which was gigantic pain, and then Rachel weeping for her children, back to the patriarchal story. So I get it. We like to read this as Westerners. We need to read a little bit with a little bit more grace through Eastern eyes, and to know it's much like listening to pop music and realizing, oh, there's a lot of analogy here. Your wife isn't as sweet as honey or whatever, but we know what you mean. And the idea in literature is the same. And when he uses the word pleroo, like it's fulfilled, we're wanting it to be a class 1 messianic prophecy, which I think is what I called it as I've taught through, a first order messianic prophecy. And this clearly is not. concept, as Matthew is known to do. Although there are plenty of first order prophecies that I think you can't get away from, and he adds those in his writings as well. And I think it's good to look at that. Now, sometimes the books out there, if you've ever read like Josh McDowell's Evidence That Demands a Verdict, he's got a whole chapter, which is a great resource to look at some of the things that we wonder about. One of them is looking at all the messianic prophecies. I wish he'd put them in two different chapters, but he has these prophecies, and you can start to read each one of them in context and say, okay, this is a first order prophecy, this is not. And even though the word plurao is fulfilled, it may be used for both. We know that in a Western sense, it's not the kind that we would call a fulfillment, but it is something that Jews in the Eastern world, and certainly in the first century, would say, yeah, I can see that connection. And so the connections are made, and it bolsters an argument for Matthew in the first century. And that's the best I can do with that, because I know what you want is what I want. We grew up with a very different sense of trying to take a newspaper article from, the Orange County Register or whatever, and trying to determine what it means. But then we do the same thing when we turn to the lyrics of a song that we like, and we think, oh, okay, this is a different genre. Well, there's a kind of a different genre even in Matthew than there is in John, and they're very different in their audiences, in their original audiences. And I think part of that is why we have 4 Gospels and not just one. God made sure that we were touching all the bases in how people were going to look to Scripture and see how it was fulfilled. Does that help at all, Alan?
It does. Can I ask 2 really quick follow-on questions that you can close my question with?
Okay.
One is, would it be possible in your understanding that maybe what Matthew's trying to do is trying to say that this Jesus who arrived is the fulfillment, if you will, and typologically of the actual return from exile, that the kingdom that he brings is, behold the feet of the messenger who brings good news, that guy kind of thing. And 1, and 2 is, do you think, and not to pick on a particular hermeneutic, but do you think that there is a particular hermeneutical bent in our modern preaching and culture that basically it maybe could benefit from a little bit more understanding of how the original readers would have read it and what that context was in not just the context of the Scripture, which is primary, but the socio-political and historical context before they jump to, Jesus lived the perfect life that you couldn't live and died for your sins, and that's what the whole Scripture is about, which is true. But do you feel like we maybe missed some richness of the text and the application because of that hermeneutic and maybe an oversimplified application of it?
Well, yes, and I'll try to skate a careful line between those two views, because yes, I do believe we miss out on some of the richness of the text, as you concluded that question with that phrase, and I think we should see kind of our hermeneutic at least being helped by reading the text with Eastern eyes, as some people have rightly written, and there's some good books out there that I think are commentaries that try to help us do that, and I've got those in my library, and they're helpful. There's a lot of rhetorical commentaries and socio-rhetorical commentaries that help us kind of look and glean the richness of the text. And we can see that. My concern is that as you still look at God communicating truth itself, right, what it's communicating is a correspondence with reality, and that reality is a hard reality, and truth always has hard edges. And I think the issues that you're bringing up were really brought to the fore with, say, the new perspective on Paul that you saw men like Don Carson responding to in talking about the fact that the language of the Reformation regarding justification, and this was the real touch point that set off a lot of wars about 25 years ago, they don't, we can't say that they were wrong, because the truth that really is communicated is a truth that you can't move. You may be able to see rhetorical issues and socio-rhetorical issues in the text that will lead you to find richness in some antitypes and metaphors and typology, and that's good, and there's nothing wrong with that. And a lot of books were written like that I think are helpful, right? Christ in the Tabernacle by Lewis Talbot, or Christ in the Temple. They're great. there's no New Testament connections to a lot of the assertions made in the text, but it does enrich our thinking, and we think, well, we're doing a lot what Matthew was doing in his gospel. Okay, there's some richness to that. But what are the hard facts being communicated regarding being made right with God, right? Sin and alienation and the need for reconciliation. There's no getting around those truths that we derive from the text. My concern is becoming more Eastern Orthodox in our hermeneutic to where we're lost in this. And then we're just saying, we just want to, we want to just emulate Christ, and we're not trying to be biblical, and, you are Bible idolaters out there in the Western church. I don't think that's proper. I think I would stand with D.A. Carson in saying we have to glean from the text the truth that has hard edges and therefore would lead us to the same basic understanding the Reformers had 500 years ago and what it means to be justified. And we cannot, just by reading the text with Eastern eyes, lose the truths that are represented in the Bible. And therefore, we are right in making the kinds of hard assertions that we make in saying, hey, Christianity is this and Mormon theology is that. And we make hard distinctions. And I'm afraid that if we go too far in the direction of saying, well, let's look more with a new set of glasses on here and find what we want to find. And it's not what we want to find. I know that's an oversimplification, a straw man. I don't mean to put it that way. But I just think there's a road in the middle of this that says, yes, let's get the richness of the text by having a little bit more of an Eastern set of eyes in appreciating what they appreciated. But let's not lose the facts that are being presented, and the facts that are being presented at the core of it is I need to be right with a holy God. I'm not. What did Christ come to do? The new perspective of Paul changed all that. Justification was changed, and men like Piper and Carson and others were trying to say, let's restore this. We can't have kind of just for lack of a better word, a more fuzzy view on how we're made right with God. It's not become a sociological issue. And there are men, right, as you know, I assume you know, guys like N.T. Wright, who make that the reality. And then it becomes, watch what their Christianity does. You can read their theology, but when you read their pastoral works, it's all about kind of having us get along now. Let's just make sure Jews and Gentiles get along. Let's make sure you and I and you and the man who's begging for money at the on-ramp get along. And let's get into social justice. And it's about the here and now. And Norm Wright wrote a book, After You Believe, which I think was a good codification of how he views sanctification and the Christian life. And he'll narc on the idea of looking beyond the horizon of this life. He says, you Christians, you're too much about getting saved for the next life, getting your name written in the Lamb's Book of Life. And I would respond to that, as I think others rightly have, in saying, no, that's huge. I can't get around how the truth, no matter how I read the text of the New Testament, leads me to say my mind's got to be set on things above, and I'm storing up treasure in heaven, and justification will be realized at the end of this life, not in this life. I'm saved, yes, but only forensically. I will be saved then literally, and I think even the word forensic people sometimes struggle with. If I were sitting here talking to someone from the Eastern Orthodox Church, they would really struggle with that. But I'm saying, no. That is what the Bible teaches. Because the Bible's got to teach something, and truth always is supposed to correspond with reality. So that's my basic answer to that in a soundbite on a radio program, Alan. But I do think there's a middle ground to say yes and no. And yes, let's appreciate some readings we don't quite appreciate like we should, and we get rid of them because our mind wants to get to the facts and we don't read the text maybe as we should. But let's look at what the text is really representing and what it's saying and the truth in it. And I do think we can say to ourselves, not just what is intended by this text, and you can see a whole new hermeneutic in this. Let's figure out what's intended by the text. Now, I care about what's intended in terms of application, but I care about what it means. And the text does mean something, right? And even in the context of what Matthew is trying to present to us regarding the birth of Christ, there's a meaning here. What's the meaning of this rhetorical section of Scripture? Now let's principalize it, which some people say you shouldn't do, and now let's apply from the principle. And I do think that is an approach to hermeneutics, it's an approach to pastoral ministry that most guys haven't even thought of these days, but need to, because we need to treat the Bible as a book that's presenting truth, and truth always is anchored in something immovable, even though language can be enriched with a lot of different genres that give us appreciation for things like a voice is heard in Rama that is like, what is that all about? Well, there is something sweet about the connection to the pain, and yet it's not something that I'm going to hold them to the kind of formulaic, mathematical thinking of, an MIT grad who can't even listen to pop radio. If you know what I'm saying. Does that help at all, Alan?
It does, and I appreciate the middle ground approach. I guess I have maybe tried poorly to articulate that middle ground approach as, buckets are useful for carrying water, but they're poor places to live in.
Correct.
And I don't know if that captures that middle ground kind of approach, but I appreciate your thoughts.
Yeah, well, if you haven't, have you read any Don Carson at all? Do you know who I'm talking about there? D.A. Carson used to be at Trinity Evangelical Divinity
I'm going to go read some more. I'm not strong enough in my Carson reading to you've given me some options and some things to go look at, so I'm going to pick up some Lewis and some Carson and some Piper, and we're going to go check out some cool stuff.
That's
Thank
good.
you.
Okay, Alan, thanks for the call. Appreciate that. 877-913-5357. Your question doesn't have to be that deep. It can be simple. Whatever your question is, I'd love to try to address it here on the program today. Call me right now, 877-913-5357. Let's go to Jeremiah. Jeremiah, you're on the line with Pastor Mike. How can I help?
Hi, Pastor Mike. We really appreciate your wisdom and your willingness to share it with us. My question is Matthew chapter 25, not 25, but 24, verses 29 through 31, and then Revelation chapter 6, verses 12 through 14. As the question is if there are like parallel passages about the same event. They talk about the sun and the moon and like the stars and the sky going from the east and the west are being rolled up like a scroll. So if those are the same events, or what event or different events are they?
No, I think you're on to something very clear here, and that is that these cataclysmic events of what's going on with the sun and the moon and the things in the skies and the heavens, as they would call it in the first century, being shaken, that's how it's put there in Matthew 24, certainly is being fulfilled in stages throughout the judgments that are listed for us from Revelation 6 through Revelation 19. Those chapters are all referring to what's going on as is synthesized in the statements in Matthew 24, verses 29 through 31. In other words, you're getting all of the highlights in a very short paragraph about all that's going on with the seals and the bowls and the trumpets. All of that is condensed in that statement in verses 29 through 31 in Matthew 24. That's why I am one who interprets Matthew 24, the Olivet Discourse. Not everybody does, but most people that teach on this station do. That this is a period of time that is describing what's going on in that tribulational period. And that tribulational period is a time that I believe is destined as the 70th week of Daniel, the time of Jacob's trouble, the time that the church is going to be removed from the earth from that period of time, and that actually a lot of the Bible, not even written for us, it's written for those that are going to be in it, written for us to know, at least in our mind, but not for our experience, just like a lot of the dead saints certainly aren't going to experience this in person. And we also, if we live, and this starts at this particular point, I think it's going to start with the rise of a world leader, and we will be out of here, I believe. I believe that makes sense because these discussions in Daniel 7 are described for the time of Jacob's trouble, the 70th week of Daniel decreed for Israel and Daniel's holy city, and Daniel's people, rather, the people of Israel. So, yes, you've made a good connection there, but I'd keep reading. Keep reading in Revelation 6, and you'll get all that goes on all the way to the gathering of the people together there and him coming back. You can add in chapter 14 of Zechariah and say all of this is discussed. You'll see a lot regarding the day of the Lord in the Old Testament prophets that looks to this final end when we have cataclysmic events taking place. Joel chapter 2, Ezekiel 32. There's a lot of passages that are going to talk about cataclysmic events, cosmic events in the heavens. And I think all of those are referring not to some metaphorical or symbolic thing. I think they're all talking about things that are actually going to happen where the world's going to be falling apart because God is pouring out his wrath on the world, and things are going to be really bad here on planet Earth. And I think that's the Great Tribulation. As Jesus said, the greatest tribulation's ever been, never been before, and never will be again, that 7-year period that's coming. So yes, I think that's a good connection. Why do you ask that question, Jeremiah?
Just because, they just seem to me like they seem pretty parallel as far as like one of them says like the sun turns red, or one of them says like the sun darkens.
Yeah. And
then talks about like how the sky is like rolled up like a scroll, and then the other section says like the sky is like from east to west. So it just seems like I just wasn't sure if that was like the day of the wrath, or if that's just if they were like parallel.
Totally,
that was just the same event.
Yes, it's the same set of events. If you go to Joel chapter 2, same thing. Sun and moon are darkened. The stars withdraw their shining. Ezekiel 32, it says, "I'm going to blot you out and cover the heavens and make the stars dark. I'll cover the sun with a cloud, and the moon will not give its light." So all these things obviously are from the perspective of standing on the face of the earth. But there's going to be a time when everything in looking up is going to be a mess. And all of that we see in the discussions of the coming of God's judgment on the earth. The time for his recompense has come. These are statements made in the Old Testament, and they haven't happened yet. Right, and I'm looking at Isaiah chapter 13, verse 10. "The stars of the heavens and their constellations will not give their light. The sun will be dark at its rising, and the moon will not shed its light." So something's going on here on earth that I think is described in great detail in Revelation chapter 6, all the way through chapter 19. And at the end, in verse 31 of Matthew 24, when it talks about gathering his people together, his elect aren't the saints of the church age. The elect are those that are converted during the tribulational period that didn't get slaughtered yet. And those are all going to be described there in chapter 19, being saved by the arrival of Christ, which is what Zechariah is talking about at the end of chapter 13 and 14 of his prophecy. So all these things are yet to come. That's what makes me, as a Bible teacher, a futurist. These kinds of things I look at, I read them, and I think, okay, when is this going to happen? It hasn't happened yet. It's going to happen. Well, when does it happen? I think it happens in this time of Jacob's trouble, this time of the 70th week of Daniel, the coming of the Son of Man. When he sets up his kingdom, he's going to be preceded by his judgment. And that judgment, according to the book of Revelation and Daniel chapter 7, and Daniel chapter 9, rather, is going to last for 7 years. And I think it's all coming, and you've made a good connection there. Keep reading your Old Testament, and you'll make even more. Even if you just look for in your Bible software, which you can find online, and just type in darkening, moon and sun, you'll find these themes a lot. And they're all looking to the very end, just before Christ comes back to set up a kingdom for Israel, where Israel is reunited with all the people from the 12 tribes, which is what happens next in Revelation 7. He's starting to pull those 144,000 special sealed people from every tongue, tribe, and nation. They're going to be a big part of the tribulational period, and you're going to see all of Israel restored. And then I think in Revelation chapter 20, he describes how long that kingdom is going to be for, and it's 1,000 years, repeated 6 or 7 times in Daniel 7. So that's why we say, or at least I would say, I'm a pre-millennialist. Millennium means 1,000 years. It's yet to come. And it's going to come when all these prophecies from Ezekiel 32, Joel 2, Amos 8, Isaiah 13, Zechariah 14, all of those things are going to happen. And then God's going to set up a kingdom for Israel. We're going to rule and reign with Christ in the church age. Those of us that are resurrected at that time are taken up and changed. And all of this is yet to come. So yeah, that's a good connection. Jesus spoke of it. And that's why Matthew 14 is yet to come. It hasn't happened yet. Helpful, Jeremiah? Does that help?
Okay. Yeah, that helps. So, maybe just one quick question, maybe like a follow up, because I know you spoke like the end of Matthew about the gathering of the elect is the gathering of those who are saved during the tribulation.
Mm-hmm.
And so that could be like Jew or Gentile or both.
Well, primarily the focus is on Israel, but all throughout the book of Revelation, it does talk about the gospel going out to every tongue, tribe, and nation, and people that are getting saved in the tribulation from every tongue, tribe, and nation. So there's some universal turning to Christ coming from every ethnic group, but the focus, according to the Old Testament and even the book of Revelation, starting in the very next chapter that you were quoting in Revelation 6, is Revelation 7, where all the tribes, Judah, Reuben, Gad, Asher, Naphtali, they're all represented here as core people serving Christ. And I'm assuming, based on everything that's described about them in the book of Revelation, they're serving Christ by spreading the gospel to the Jews. Now, they have a voice beyond that, but people are being saved all over the world in the tribulational period. But the focus for God is fulfilling the promise to gather together, as it says in Romans chapter 11, that last generation of Israel, and all of Israel then will be saved. In the last generation, he's going to bring Israel. If you go there now and share the gospel, most of them are going to reject you and say, we don't believe he's the Messiah. Well, at the end of time, most of them are going to say, yes, he is the Messiah. You're going to see a mass conversion of Messianic Jews in Israel.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So that, I think that answered my question. I guess what I was going to add was like the Matthew 24, the gathering of the elect, that would happen after God already sealed the Jews and after they've preached the gospel to the world.
Correct. They're going to be gathered. If you read in chapter 19 of Revelation, they're all going to be brought together. And then in verse 11 and following, Christ himself is going to come back and judge their enemies and save them. They're going to be saved by Christ personally, and you can tie that to Zechariah 14. His feet are going to touch the Mount of Olives, and he's going to set up a kingdom. That'll be the day when God finally comes and sets up the kingdom he keeps talking about. I mean, we have in a sense, we have the kingdom here in that he's ruling in our hearts and in our churches, but the world doesn't give a rip about any of that. But one day they all will, after 7 years of torture, they're going to realize their sin, and they're either going to die shaking their fist at God, which you read in chapter 6, by the way, of Revelation. They all realize this is the wrath of God, just like everyone seems to when something big happens. And then the people that are turning to him, they're going to be saved by Christ, and Christ is going to now set up a kingdom with Israel, and the rest of the dead are going to have to wait until after the 1,000 years is over to be judged and be assigned a place of punishment, depending on how bad or how moderately bad they were. Yeah, good questions. Keep reading.
Okay. Appreciate it.
Yep. If you want more on this, you go to PastorMike.com and you can look up my 13-week study on end times, and it walks through all of this. It'll help you kind of piece together the book of Revelation and maybe give you some deeper appreciation for all those Old Testament texts that I think refer to the same things going on in Revelation, including Matthew 24, which was a great connection that you made, Jeremiah. Thanks for the call. Appreciate it. Mike Fabarez, that's my name, the voice you hear on Focal Point Radio. If you have a question about the Bible or the Christian life or anything related somehow to Christianity, give me a call, 877-913-5357. Let's go to Veronica. Veronica, you're on the air with Pastor Mike. How can I help?
Hey, Pastor Mike, how are you?
Good.
Thanks for taking the call, and I've been a long-time listener. Okay, more on the Christian life. My question is more from in marriage. We've only been married about a year and a half, and before we were married, let's just say there's been many issues, but before we were married, we watched a movie. So if we're talking about a particular movie, entertainment, didn't know going to the movie, Oppenheimer, that there was going to be so many long, drawn-out sexual scenes. Yeah? And so I put my head down. He had his face covered. And, they just keep going on. I didn't particularly enjoy the movie. He seemed not to, didn't want to recommend it. I'm only calling here to ask because I don't know a proper response. Inside, I was surprised. It is kind of a little unnerving because this isn't, the first time something like this. But anyway, so then he had stated he watched it again on his own because he travels a lot, and due to his status at my church and our whole community thing, I don't really have comfort in asking anybody there, like, what is a good response? Is it okay? He said he'd just fast forward past the scenes. He knows when to click past the scenes, but finds it to be an important movie.
Right. Well, here is a help that at least the world tries to give us in giving us some advisory. I'm just looking at it right now, looked it up, and it says if you're watching this movie that you've mentioned, Oppenheimer, it says Oppenheimer, rather. It says, there are, it says there's warning about sexual content, mature themes, advisable to look at parental guides, blah, 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 blah. So, yeah, at least in any movie that's put out today, I mean, our culture is still giving some kind of rating as to how sexually charged this is or what mature themes are, and you can always go to, these parental guides or these common sense media guides and find out how bad it's going to be before you choose to watch it. Plenty of movies I can think about that, I wouldn't watch just because I try to completely avoid those kinds of things, but on flights across the Atlantic or whatever, they're on a lot of times the airplane, and they're all edited, and which is great, right? I guess because they don't want the 13-year-old sitting next to you to see those scenes, and so I've ended up watching some of these that have been edited, and so I do think it's a good idea, especially if we know our weaknesses, to avoid things that are going to, tempt us to think things we shouldn't think. So I do think that a wife can say to a husband, and I think this is absolutely legitimate. I mean, this is what marriage sometimes ends up being in so many situations, is a wife saying to a husband, I'm not comfortable with you watching that anymore. Or I'm not comfortable with us watching this, and I don't want you to watch it. And I think that's fine. We give up our rights, as Romans chapter 14 says, even if his conscience was clear and he can somehow just avoid all that, if his wife is going to say, hey, I don't want you doing it, we end up saying, because I love you, I won't do it. And I think that's a completely appropriate thing to do. And we got to pull that trigger, carefully and advisedly and on issues that matter. And sometimes, it won't be worth it for every single mature theme, because it might be warfare or something that we can read our Bibles or imagine or see and think, this isn't going to mess up my sanctification. But obviously, scenes of beautiful women without their clothes on can certainly mess up a man's sanctification. So for a wife to say, if a man isn't recognizing that's not good spiritual appetite for his recreational viewing, he should realize that his wife's going to say no, and I would assume he would respond well to that. And if not, I'd say it again, and then he stands on his own before God, and I think God will deal with him appropriately, because when a wife says don't do it and a guy's going to do it anyway, particularly if she says it twice, I don't think he's going to get away with it as a real Christian without some discipline from God. So I would trust God in that, and I would try to trust your husband in that, in responding rightly to your request. But you think you have every right to request that, right? Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess because another pastor friend had suggested he was going to take his wife, and we said, probably want to pick a different movie. I had no idea, but then he said he went and watched it again and fast-forwarded once the parts came on, and it just didn't make sense. So I don't understand. But there's other issues going on, and just didn't know where to.
Yeah. Well, be forthright.
Yeah, I don't think the response was necessarily to comply, but more like, well, you watched a basketball movie with some cursing in it, so
Well,
okay.
There's a big difference, right, between.
I agree.
Right, some of the language that we are faced with, we can't stand the line. You can't control him. That's true, and women should not seek to control their husbands, and husbands can't control their wives. Yeah. But as Christians, we certainly can make a statement, and God then, I think, will hold us accountable for it.
Okay, thank you. Yeah,
okay.
I didn't know what do you do with the surprise inside, and it's a defense instead of a, hey, I can see that. Okay.
Well, remember the book of the Song of Solomon, and even the Proverbs say so often, your job, right, is to make him not have any interest in anyone else. And this is your tenderness, your sweetness, your sexuality. You're married. You're his wife. According to 1 Corinthians 7, you are to be the fulfillment of all that he needs. And you just, leaning into that certainly is helpful with anything he might see throughout the day on a billboard, right?
Yes, and he pretty much ignores everything. So, anyway, a lot deeper, a lot more things.
It sounds like it may be deeper. May need a counseling appointment to work through some of the details of that.
Yes, and we have, and that was just one particular thing that I didn't feel like I was, should be made to feel that I was wrong on. With, it didn't sit well with that. We'll just fast forward.
Yeah, well,
and it's okay because...
Well, let me make a larger
Okay.
statement. Now, I'm not saying there's not more steps to make, but it could be, and this is a bigger statement, and I don't want to go dark or negative, but you can have, as a wife or as a husband, a situation where all that is possible to be done has been done. You've prayed, you've pleaded with God, you've sought counsel, you've done all you can do, and you still find yourself in a situation saying, this is not the ideal marriage, this is not what I wanted, this is not what I thought I was signing up for. But you're in this relationship, much like Hosea and Gomer in the Old Testament, to try and glorify the Lord by your commitment. And here's the deal. We all have a cross to bear. Some of us have physical pains or diseases, and some of us have, whatever it might be. And some of us may have difficult marriages. And if that's the case, right, then God would say, just like he said to Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 13, or chapter 12 rather, he says, my grace is sufficient for you. I can buoy you up and keep you afloat and keep you living for me faithfully, even when life is difficult, even when your marriage is hard. And it takes two to have a good marriage, really, it does. But it takes one to be able to do all things through Christ who strengthens me, whether I have a lot or a little, right? Whether I am sick or healthy, or whether I'm in a good marriage or a bad marriage. So trust in the Lord. You can get through this, even if the next 60 years or 50 years or however young you are, how much time you have left. As a faithful wife to a man that maybe is not making all the decisions that he should be making, you still can thrive as a Christian and be a great blessing to him, to your kids if you have some, and to everyone that you know in your church and in the world. That is something God can do, and he's great at taking people in less than ideal circumstances. And almost every character of the Bible we find, right? The narratives tell us about how imperfect and how difficult some of these people's lives were. So hang in there. Don't lose heart. You need to stay. You need to reread old fourth chapter of Philippians, which I think we Christians reread a lot, and find yourself in those pages and say, you can do all things through Christ who strengthens you. Hang in there, Veronica. Okay?
Will do.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for the call. 877-913-5357. Whatever your question, no question too small, no question too dumb, anything that you're facing that I may be able to help on, whether it's theology, doctrine, Christian life, Christian issues, whatever it is, anything related to your life as a Christian, I'd love to try to tackle that. Let's go back to the phones now. Jane, you're on the air with Pastor Mike. How can I help?
Hey, Pastor Mike. Can you hear me okay? I'm using earbuds.
I can hear you just fine.
Okay. My question is about heaven. You mentioned earlier in passing about different positions that we will have in heaven.
Yes.
And when you said that, I tell my friends a lot, I'm really scared. I'm scared, concerned that when I get to heaven, I'm going to be the toilet washer, because I just don't think I'm gathering that many rewards. I mean, like, compared to so many other people. So if I have not as many rewards as like you or other people, but I still have the same joy.
Sure.
Joy. I mean, I'm trying to figure this out.
Yeah, you'll have joy, right? There's no doubt about that. But you're still breathing, Jane. You're still around. And when Jesus says things like this, I'll get back to what you asked. It's a good question, and I'll answer it. But first, let me tell you, Matthew 10:41, right? Whoever gives one of these little ones even a cup of cold water because he's my disciple, truly, I tell you, he will by no means lose his reward. Okay, all I'm saying is today you could start storing up treasure in heaven by doing something selfless in serving someone because he's a follower of Christ. You could write a note to your pastor. You could go and try to help out in a situation that you know somebody in your small group is struggling with. And as soon as you do that selfless act because someone is a follower of Christ, as Hebrews 6 says, God's not unjust. He's not going to forget that. This isn't like you do something right, you get a reward. You do something wrong, the reward gets taken away. That's not how it works. Right? Here it is in the Bible saying, store up for yourself treasure in heaven. Because once they're there, they're guarded by the power of God. They're guarded in his presence. Now, tomorrow, you may be a lot of wood, hay, and straw, and it's all burnt up. But all I'm telling you, if Jesus beckons us for rewards with something as small as giving someone a bottle of water, I'm going to say there's a lot of good that you can do between now and the time we lower your body in the ground, and we can say, this girl, all the way to the end, she was helping. She gave a cup of coffee to a gal who was struggling and sat down with her, held her hand, and prayed with her. There's going to be reward for you Jane, in heaven for doing that. That's huge. So don't give up on storing up treasure in heaven. Secondly, this is the way I put it in the book that I wrote, because I knew people were going to have the very question you ask. And I wrote a little story in there about the fact that if you were to think about heaven this way, you've got to remember, when we talk about rewards, it's something no one seems to talk about these days, but we need to talk about it because Jesus talked about it all the time. And if he did, we should preach it. But if you think, oh man, I'm going to get there and suffer loss, just like it says in 1 Corinthians 3, a lot of my life's just going to be burned up, gold, silver, precious stones are going to be sparse, but wood, hay, and straw are everywhere. It's going to be terrible. I illustrated it this way. The reward ultimately, the biggest reward, is Christ himself. You will be in the presence of the unmitigated perfect one of all the universe, the one who died for you, rose again, who's been interceding for you before the Father. He's been a stand-up advocate for your life. He is your Savior, and you will be so glad to have personal presence with Christ, right? And I illustrate it this way. If you have the person, like, you could think, I would love to have lunch with this person, right? And I said, for some people, it's a sports athlete. For others, it's a singer or a politician or whatever. Somebody you think is amazing. I'd just love to have lunch with them. I said, here's the thing. If I said, I've worked out the lunch for you, it's next Tuesday, and here's the thing. You wouldn't really care if I said to you, it's going to be at this amazing amazing steakhouse. You're going to sit there with this wonderful person that you've died to have lunch with. You can't wait to have a meal with. And this person's going to be there across the table. You're going to have hors d'oeuvres. You're going to have cloth napkins. You're going to have an amazing ambiance. They're going to be live violinists in the corner. You'd be like, amazing, right? But if I said, hey, you're going to get to have this person, you're going to meet at the park, there's going to be a bucket of chicken, there's going to be, your favorite soda there, and you're going to drink out of the can, and you're going to eat some chicken, but you're going to be across from this amazing person you couldn't wait to be with. I'm going to say there's great joy in either situation. Is one better than the other? Yeah, it is. It would be better for you to have a lot more gold, silver, precious stones, but you're not going to be sad. How can you be sad? Right? You're across the table from someone that you have longed to be with, someone who is so amazing to be with, who brings you nothing but joy, right? That person is your reward. Christ is the ultimate reward. And yet, are there rewards? Yes. Should we care about rewards? Yes. Is there a difference between, driving home from your lunch in a beautiful car or in just, you're in a Prius? Whatever. You'll get around. All your needs are going to be met. The question is, right, we would rather, as God told us to, try and aspire to have rewards that we cannot lose. And that, to me, if you're still breathing, you got a chance to do it. You can intercede for someone at your church who's in need of prayer, and that 30 minutes of prayer will be rewarded. You giving someone a gift card is going to be rewarded. You trying to help out is going to be rewarded. So don't give up. And I know, Jane, it's easy for us to focus on all of the scratches and dents in our Christian life, but you have a Christian life. You wouldn't be calling in if you didn't care about your Christian life. So keep investing in living out your life of Christ for the people around you, especially the Christians. As Galatians 6 says, as you have opportunity, do good to all people, but especially to those of the household of faith. And I'll bet even in saying that, you've thought of some people that you can encourage, that you can serve, that you can give, you can do something helpful to. Go serve them because they're followers of Christ, and you will be rewarded. And one day we'll have a conversation. We're going to meet up on the other side, and you're going to say, you're right. Look what I got for doing these things that you prompted me to do. So get out there, Jane, and do it, okay?
Thank you so much.
Okay, keep your focus on other people. Okay, very good. Appreciate the call.
Okay.
877-913-5357. That's the number to call if you have a question about the Bible or the Christian life. Let's go to Angel. Angel, you're on the air with Mike Fabarez. How can I help?
Yes. Hi, good afternoon, brother.
Hello.
I am struggling with some issues regarding my vision. I was born half blind, and now at my tender age of, midlife, vision in my good eye is starting to deteriorate, and it's affecting my ministry, my business, my home life. In general, I'm struggling, pushing back against the anxiety that this is causing, and kind of feel a little bit defeated. And it is it is difficult, yes, to push back against this. I wanted to know your thoughts.
Yeah, well, I feel that all the time, and I mean it. I really do. I'm at the age things are starting to break down in my life, and especially all the cartilage between all my joints, and I'm in a lot of pain every day. And I realize the truth of what Paul said in 2 Corinthians 4, and that is that our outer self, our bodies, are wasting away. But what was great about the Apostle Paul is he said our inner self is being renewed day by day. That's the challenge. It's hard for our inner person, right, to be stronger, more optimistic, more fruitful when our outer man is giving us all kinds of trouble, right? And if you're going blind, that can't but affect your whole life. My mother-in-law is going blind right now, and it's hard, right? She's had a whole life of seeing, and now she's losing her sight. She can't read stuff. She can hardly see, can't go outside at night. It's just really rough. She's losing her vision. And here's the thing. If I were losing my vision, or you, Angel, you're losing your vision, we're going to have to lean in to what Paul said about being renewed. And the way he did it in verse 17, the very next verse, after he says, outer man's decaying, inner man's being renewed, he says, because this light, momentary affliction, right, my chronic deteriorating arthritis and your vision problems, whatever it might be, is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison as we look not to the things, pardon the pun here, that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. For the things that are unseen, right, they're transient, or things rather that are seen are transient. They go away, but the things that are unseen are eternal. That reminds me of my favorite verse, which is Romans 8:18. I consider the sufferings of this present time, they're not worth comparing to the glory that's going to be revealed to us. So whatever's happening in your body, right, whether it's Paul's thorn in his flesh or my arthritis or your blindness, I think of the blind man in John 9. The blindness was so that God could be glorified. And so God is going to be glorified as your outer man decays. In your case, your sight goes away. And 2 Corinthians 4:18 needs to become your theme verse, because the things that matter are not the things you could see if you could see them. They're the things that no one can see, but they're real. The return of Christ coming on the clouds in glory. All of that is going to happen, and all of that is going to be what matters for you, Angel. So I know it's hard. I hear that we've lost connection here, but I'm telling you, please do what the Lord Jesus Christ calls us to do, and that is to set our sights beyond the horizon of this life, as Colossians chapter 3 says, set our sights, our minds on things above, not on things of the earth. And that's what can lead us to live in verse 16 of 2 Corinthians 4 by focusing on verses 17 and 18 of 2 Corinthians 4. We look beyond this life. We have to. The problem with the Christian life so often is people think it's about the here and now. If my life can't be better now, right, then what good is it, right? If I can't have an outer man that's pumped up and healthy and feeling good and I'm ripped and I got my six-pack, if I can't have that, then what good is it? Well, the Bible says it's all going to decay. That's what Genesis 3 said would happen. Our ears are going to stop hearing, our eyes are going to stop seeing, and our joints are going to stop moving pain-free. That's going to happen. But all of it is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. I will tell you this, just to combine, Angel, if you're still listening, Jane's call with your call, Angel, and that is this, that you can utilize this encumbrance of your sight, the loss of your sight, as a leverage for what is going to be coming to you in the next life. And by that I'm saying, look for ways that you can utilize your life, even as a man losing his sight. It may interrupt your ministry in many ways, but look at the ministry it may give you, the open doors that it may give you. And I hope you're familiar, and if not, you should be, with Johnny Erickson Tata, this quadriplegic who's given her life to serve the Lord after a diving accident, and she can't move her 4 limbs. And she is an amazing woman who has taken her disability and has used it as a platform to try and minister to people. I'll bet there's a school of the blind somewhere within driving distance of your house, and you can have someone take you there, and you can minister to those people as someone who knows the truth of the gospel, and you can lean in and help them all realize that physical sight isn't everything. Right? What matters is our spiritual sight, because the things that we can't see are eternal, and we need to see them. As Paul said to the Galatians, we can see Christ crucified before our eyes. Well, of course, I wasn't talking about their physical eyes, because the Galatian churches were many, many miles from Jerusalem. But They had been exposed to the truth of the gospel, and their eyes saw it. And one day, our eyes are going to see Christ coming back. Please recognize, it's going to open up opportunities for you. This is such an important thing to look to the future. And the good thing about so many books today, good books, is that they're put on audio. And books I've written are put on audio. But one book that I would recommend is setting your sights on things beyond the horizon of this life, is reading Randy Alcorn's book on heaven. It's a classic. Maybe you've already read it. Read it again. And you can have it read to you, right? ChristianAudio.com, I think it is. You can just get it through Audible. Plenty of places you can get these Audible books. And put your headphones on and listen to where you and I are going. And Randy does a great job in this book trying to make this very real and tangible to us, because it is real and tangible and it's coming. And set your mind on those things. Get your heart there. And then say, like I said to Jane, get up and do something. Dictate a note. Do what you can to try and encourage and serve the people of God. Because one note, to put it in modern terms here, one note sent to someone because he's a disciple, right? You're not going to lose your reward. One cup of cold water, one act of service. Christ is going to reward us. And I love the way it's put there, 2 Corinthians 4:17. This light momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. Something great is coming. The circumstances of suffering are going to be replaced with God standing up, girding himself to serve us, which is an amazing thought. And it's coming. It's coming. Coming for all of us, whether you're feeling good or in the prime of your life, the model of good health, or whether you're ill and sick. No matter what's going on, there's a great thing coming in the next life. And I love my favorite verse, Romans 8:18. The good of the good now is nothing. The bad of the bad now is nothing compared to the greatness that's coming to us. Talk to you tomorrow. We'll see you. Bye-bye.
You're listening to Ask Pastor Mike Live with pastor and Bible teacher Mike Fabarez. For more straightforward Bible teaching from Pastor Mike, listen to our Focal Point broadcast on this station. And you can look up our full broadcast schedule on PastorMike.com. This is Dave Drury for Focal Point Ministries, hoping you'll join us next time for more Ask Pastor Mike Live.